Katherine. Can everybody hear me in the back? Yes? Okay, great. So as you might have seen, my talk is called How to Get More Money. But that is really, it's not a Filipowitz talk or a CMC presentation. This is really about my experience in how I negotiated a higher salary for myself using a lot of soft skills. And so I want to share a story with you guys that hopefully you will resonate with and maybe learn a couple things that you can help other people with along the way. So a little bit about myself. When I was really little, my mom would teach me how to negotiate my salary. This is a little bit weird, but because she was a professional woman in the 80s, she had to teach herself. So she taught me. The second thing that you should know is that I've always thought about myself as a breadwinner of my own household. So I've never thought that I would rely on someone else to create that income. And as a sociology major in college, I had read so many stories about women who had depended on men for money that they couldn't leave abusive relationships. I've never been in an abusive relationship, but these are things that I think about consistently. And it's why I also am going to get my MBA, because I want to be financially independent. However, all of these things kind of changed when I found a piece of paper that said that I was earning less than someone who had previously had my job. And it was significant. It was something that you don't just walk away from. You stand there and you hold this piece of paper and you say, what the and you don't know what to do with yourself. You feel cheated. You feel degraded. You feel as though someone just hit you in the stomach and said, walk out this door, lady, because you ain't worth nothing. And so I decided at that moment, when I was staring at this piece of paper that said that I was worth less, that I could either walk away from this job and I could go for another position at a different company and I'd be successful, or I could work to try to change the gender pay gap. And that's something that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that my mom and I constantly talk about. And I decided that I needed to change my point of view from achievement of just wanting a higher salary to activism. But in this case, I needed to be an activist for myself before I could be an activist for other people. Now I teach a lot of women, friends mostly, about how to negotiate their salary. So a lot of what I learned from this experience, I've brought to life in different arenas. So as I was planning what I do with this information and then deciding how to execute on that, I decided that I wanted to not address it with my employers for the first couple weeks. Instead, I wanted to just insert my accomplishments into daily conversations with my boss and my CEO and my VP of operations. And I wanted them to know that I was valuable. I was there for a reason. I was contributing on a daily basis. I wasn't great at self-promotion, which a lot of women aren't. But I was working really, really hard, and I was thinking forward. So I was thinking about the strategy of the organization and how I was contributing to it. And I wanted them to know that. So for the next 2 weeks, all I did was have those informal conversations. And I, slyly mentioned that my staff were happier and, more productive, and that I had decreased budgets at certain times during the past year. All these things that I hadn't really told them before, that they maybe had noticed on their own. And so finally, I decided 2 weeks later or some point in that 2 weeks, I scheduled a meeting, as you do with your boss, ahead of time. And I made an appointment on her calendar to go through my trajectory at the company, and my growth plan is kind of how I talked about it. And so what I decided to do was spend the first 20 minutes of that meeting talking about my accomplishments and working through exactly what I had done before, or while I was at the company. I wanted her to walk away from this meeting, not necessarily hearing about my salary concerns, but knowing I kicked butt. Like knowing that I was valuable and that if she saw another spreadsheet with my salary on it, that she'd be like, whoa, 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 wait a second. Katherine Gerber, this girl, she deserves more money. Get this girl more money. This is what I wanted her to walk away with. So I talked a lot about the value that I brought to the organization. I talked a lot about how I wanted to grow the organization. I talked a lot about what she and I had in common. Simple stuff, people skills. And at the very end of our conversation, I changed it just slightly. And I said, you know, there's one more thing that I really want to talk with you about. And it reflects my performance and contributions. And that's my economic value. I want you to just notice for a second that I didn't say salary. Sometimes women get put into these buckets of super aggressive about salary. She wants to close the gender pay gap. And this woman doesn't know how to promote herself, so I'm going to put her over here in this bucket of like, steady worker, but may not change the company someday and may not run it. So I wanted to go and talk about economic value, that I was worth more than a number. And so I said, you know, this is what I've done this past year. I think in order to more accurately reflect my contributions and what I'd like to achieve at the company in the following year, that X number per day as an increase to my, excuse me, that's not what I said. I said, I would like you to consider X number per day as an increase. I never said salary, and I never said a full number per year. It's a tactic that a lot of people use, especially women actually, where they talk a lot about this at women's conferences. Because when you talk about, you know, like $30 a day, that sounds awesome. Yeah, you're totally worth $30 a day. That's like an expensive lunch, right? But when you talk about $10,000 or something more, then it's a little bit more daunting. And people immediately go to their budget spreadsheets and they're like, $10,000, you know? I really want to be rewarded for keeping the numbers down this year, so I don't think I'm going to give you $10,000. But $30 a day, quite possible, very possible. So she responded in a very boss-like way, which was, thank you, and I will talk to our CEO and VP of operations about this. Ding! Thank goodness I had talked to them in the last 2 weeks about my contributions. So the next week, we have another one-on-one meeting, and she follows up, and she says, you know, I wasn't able to hit that number, but I was able to get halfway there. And I said, thank you. This is amazing. I'm so appreciative. I really look forward to working towards doing X, Y, and Z for the company in the next year, using that money to support me. And then I said, but I also know that that doesn't hit the mark of where I really need to be. And so I'd really love to continue the conversation and talk about my growth plan and how I can improve to be able to hit that mark within the next year. So I'd like to schedule a meeting for the next quarter to talk about that. So it took another 4 quarters for that to happen. But we did it, and she gave me that extra money at the end of the next year. The other thing that you should know is that this company was in pay freezes from the time that I started to the time that I left. And it was a remarkable thing that I had learned somewhere at a women's conference that, and we can talk about this all day, but generally, men will still ask for a pay raise even though there's a pay freeze. And women just don't. We think, I'm invested in the company, somebody told me this isn't a good idea, it's going to hurt my reputation, I'm going to be too aggressive about it, so I'm not going to ask. But I did, because I had heard that other women were successful about this, which is partly why I'm sharing this story. And so the pay freeze was kind of in the back of my head, but it was also something that I wanted to beat. It was like one of those goals where you're just like, I'm going to kick this goal out the door. Like, I am going to get past a pay freeze. And I did. They had the money. It's just that you have to find it. The other thing that I did is that I talked to everybody before they had made budget decisions. So this is also a really important tactic. You can talk to somebody all day about your salary, but if they've already made the annual budget and have their salaries priced out, then you can't really make moves on that, right? But if they know going in that you are the person in the organization that they need to make happy, then you will be addressed in some way. Maybe 50%, but you will be addressed. So this whole entire experience meant a lot to me because I was able to reframe what I had done and build on this resilience that I had to personally come up with, of out of the depths of looking at this spreadsheet and then come up above and be like, haha, I'm gonna get you, spreadsheet, you're gonna be taken down. And so it felt awesome, and I felt valued, and I felt worthy, and my performance increased. So it's not just about budgets or whatever. It's economic value of people. And so there are a couple tactics that we can all think about when we are negotiating our salaries. And I've mentioned a couple of them, but I do want to reiterate them. And one is to negotiate during pay freezes. You can still get money, surprisingly. I found that out. The second is that you do need to ask before a budget is created, if you can. You also, excuse me, you can really capitalize on your own personal strengths. So one of mine is really just spending time with people and getting to know them and making sure that they feel heard. And so if I hadn't done that with my boss on a regular basis, I don't think that she would have come through for me nearly as much. And in fact, I saw her not come through for other people at other points in time. And so building that personal connection is incredibly important, because salary negotiations don't happen at performance reviews. They happen way before that. They happen when you're developing that relationship with that person, when you're going out for a beer with that person. You need to be developing that on an ongoing basis. There are a bunch of other points that I'm sure I will come up with, but those were some of the top ones that I thought about. This all relates back to who we are as Johnson leaders and who we are as potential managers and CEOs of companies. Because over a lifetime, a woman may miss out on about an accumulated $1 million because of structural issues and because of not taking advantage of small opportunities. You may think that's a really big number, and it is. I shouldn't disregard that. But one thing that I want to break this down for you guys so that we can think about this, because when college graduates are coming out of college and they are working for our company, we want to make sure that they are on an equitable standing so that we aren't contributing to the gender pay gap. So right when people graduate from college, most college graduate women who I've talked to don't know that they should even negotiate for their salary. And I've heard some people talk with me about how their first employer didn't negotiate, which is actually probably a good thing because college graduates don't know. But if they do, then usually what happens, and where the gender pay gap comes from, is that men get a little bit of a bump. They get $3,000 more because they were negotiating. And so what happens at performance review time is that those performance reviews are based on percentage increases. And so the percentages just keep climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing. And the other things that contribute to this are, during performance reviews, there's sometimes gender bias that we don't realize that we have. I'm sure that I've had some in the past, and I consistently work to break that down. And I've taught my male colleagues as well how to negotiate for their salaries, I should mention. But sometimes what happens is that we define women as being really a steady worker, someone who knows how to get things done in the company, someone who doesn't take risks, but she is thoughtful. And she gets a good performance rating. And that contributes to the percentage that she gets economically. And then sometimes, not always, but a guy might get more of a gendered description as hard charging, this guy really takes initiative. This guy really is working his butt off for this company. You know what? He could be CEO one day. In order to do that, I think that I need to like make sure that his performance review is really awesome. And so these small gender biases really add up. And so that's where the $1 million comes from. That's where the 77 cents to every dollar in pay inequity comes from. And it sucks. Sorry, I don't know if I should say that. But it's something that we can change, which is the worst part about it. And so, or the best, actually. Let's flip that around. So as leaders, we can actually make small changes to change this environment for each other. And as managers, I want you guys to be aware of the decisions that you're making or these biases that you have. And I want you to help both genders understand these things so that we can more accurately give people the promotions that they deserve. So a couple tips I would love for you guys to walk away with, and things that I personally have experienced. So if you want her to take initiative, if you want a female employee to take initiative, tell her that you want her to take initiative. Sometimes women don't know that they will be rewarded for that. They might think that they will be penalized for that. And so telling people what you expect of them, which seems so logical, but isn't always done, will be really, really helpful. The other thing that you can do is, there's not much you can do when someone initially negotiates their salary with their HR person, but when eventually they start working for you, you can talk about how to self-promote without being incredibly egotistical. So owning your accomplishments and knowing what you've done in the past, but still continuing to learn. And teaching those skills to your employees is really, really important. I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to cheat for a second, and I have a bunch of other tips that I don't want to miss out on, so I'm going to look at them. Another important one is access to opportunities and information. Sometimes some people are just better at going and finding and asking for opportunities and information than other people. And so making sure that your employees actually have an equitable standing in that regard will allow them to perform or will allow you to see that they can all perform equally well or some better than others. But it shouldn't be the lack of information or opportunity that holds someone back. Another point is to know that she's a breadwinner. So I think, some comments that I've heard in the past have been that maybe she'll get pregnant, and then what's her economic value? First of all, it's illegal, by the way. There's a pregnancy act you should look at. It's important. But you also need to know that we're in the 21st century and that women run households and women are looking to be CEOs of Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, and that they need to be paid the same amount as their male counterparts. And using the argument that they will be raising a family or that the guys will be the breadwinners is not an argument in my eyes. So please make sure that you actually address that when you're talking to people about salaries. The other piece is self-deprecating language. So this was something I personally had to work a lot on, especially at the beginning of my career. I would say things like, oh, my team did this, and it wasn't really me. It was, it was my team, don't worry about it. But really I had put most of the work in, or had come up with a creative idea and hadn't given myself the credit, which kind of shot me in the foot a little bit later. And so making sure that when you're working with people, everyone, make sure that they aren't using self-deprecating language. And of course we talk about this in our CWGs, but it's really important that we purposefully make sure that people know that they're doing it and that it needs to be stopped. So as leaders at Johnson, one thing I hope that we all walk away from this experience with is a broader understanding of cultures and of biases that we may have had. And so hopefully we'll all be able to break these down a little bit more and potentially close these structural gaps that have been in existence for decades. And so I'm calling on you guys to take small steps with people, but also large steps to make sure that this doesn't persist. Thank you.